All right. Welcome, everybody. We are live with Tim McMillan. He's a retired lieutenant from the police force. He's done some intelligence analysis and also has been an investigative reporter, largely writing about UAPs, the whole UFO situation. And the great thing with Tim is that he has some remarkable sources. He gets a lot of really deep, great information, which is especially helpful right now when we have so many important things going on, especially as of yesterday when the New York Times dropped another bomb on all of us, another important story that they have out there. So we'll be talking about that. And I guess my first question, Tim, are your initial observations with the New York Times article?
Well, I'll be honest with you,
and I'm sorry. I guess we should summarize the artitle first.
Sure.
Let me do that real quick. Essentially, the article was titled that, it's titled "No Longer in Shadows. Pentagon UFOs unit will make some findings public." I think that title was a bit misleading. Some people have said they buried the lead, which I think they did. I think it should have been titled "Government Officials Claim, government has UFO debris," or "the government has UFO crashes." I think something like that would be more accurate. But sorry, go ahead.
No. Actually, I'm glad you kind of elaborated on that, because it helps. For me, my initial impression when you read the article set the tone, because there appeared to be, and you could see it too, being a journalist and writing for other outlets, there's a conflict in the piece. Meaning, you're right. The headlines is, editors put that out. So that's the writers don't choose their headlines. They can try, but 9 times out of 10. So you kind of saw what the editor's tone was, what maybe they wanted. And there was this interesting mix of where it seemed to be 2 separate, mutually exclusive themes. One was the idea of UFO crash debris that the government may have in their possession, or somebody has in their possession. Simply these events have occurred. But then you also had the UAP task force and the Senate Select provision that just came out. So there's this weird convoluted thing, because there's nothing with that latter Senate provision. I've not heard anything or seen anything and heard from anybody that's working in that whole domain that crash retrievals or anything is a part of that. So what the O&I task force, that if they're doing that, that's nothing I've heard of. But then you also had the kind of this inclusion of the crash material. Yeah, I had to read it a couple times, because I think one of the problems is, especially if you paid attention to the topic for the last month, 2 months, I think there was an expectation set by this article that was going to come out. We'd heard a lot of things that were going to be shared here. This was going to be it. We were going to find out what happened at Roswell, and just short of showing us the alien bodies, and that wasn't what came out in the article. It did mention some crash retrieval stuff. I had to when I read it again and tried to picture it as if I hadn't heard any of the other stuff. I think for the general reader, it's an interesting topic. It does, get their attention that there is some tangible, real action going on in government with the UAP task force. I will say there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of proving that UFO crashes, or was the term that was initially used, otherworldly craft have crashed and they've been recovered. If that was the goal, that I don't think that proved it. Certainly not conclusively. I think for the general public or UFO people, that didn't prove that that's true yet.
Right.
Really interesting.
Yeah, I think that the article was interesting. I thought it was, for the New York Times, super sloppy. It almost felt a little bit Frankenstein. I mean, pieces from one person, from another, like lots of voices. As someone who writes, and you can kind of hear the voices of the writers usually in their writing. And in this one especially, and I don't mean to be picking on Ralph Blumenthal or Leslie Kean, who wrote the article, because there's no doubt, kind of like you said, the editors got in here and they really hacked it up and made a lot of changes. So it certainly just doesn't lie on just Leslie and Ralph as far as any potential problems that have arisen, of which already some have. But I think that's part of the issue. And like you said, yeah, unfortunately, as writers, which is, of course, a frustration for all of us because we have to deal with the fallout. We don't get to choose our headlines. Our editors do. And we're, as far as me, most people are rarely satisfied with what their editors choose, because it doesn't necessarily represent what message we're trying to write. But I want to give a couple examples real quick on a couple corrections and statements that you had talked about. This is what was surprising to me, is that it really relied on opinion. It said that Elizondo was convinced that there were UFO crashes, something he hasn't said. But I did contact with him and I said, hey, you've never really said this. And he said, true, but I stand by it. So he stands by that statement, which I think is significant. Also, it says Harry Reid believes something similar. Now, they had to correct Harry Reid's comment. Here's their correction. An earlier version of this article inaccurately rendered remarks attributed to Harry Reid, the retired Senate Majority Leader from Nevada. Mr. Reid said he believed that crashes of objects of unknown origin may have occurred and that retrieved material should be studied. He did not say that crashes had occurred and that retrieved material had been studied secretly for decades. That is quite a difference. And it takes a lot of already what is kind of a toothless article. It takes some more teeth out of it. So we're kind of left to the belief of these people without providing proof. In fact, it even says no physical proof provided. The only one really going on the record and saying, hey, I know this is happening and I've briefed people on it, is Eric Davis, of which there are kind of some issues with his past comments on these items as well.
Sure. I mean, here's the thing, and I totally agreed with what George Knapp recently said when he was on Joe Rogan, when he mentioned this article possibly coming out and said, but I don't know because it's a tough sell. And to expand on what he said, there's not just a tough sell to an editor and outlet. It's a tough sell to provide really conclusive, gripping evidence that this idea of that UFO crashes, craft have been recovered, this type of thing, to provide that evidence and validate it. Because let's take the UFO kind of excitement out of it and consider what we're talking about here. We're talking about government cover-ups, conspiracy at high levels of government. We're talking about serious political issues, things that go beyond just, whether someone's interested in UFOs or not. The average person should be interested if their government has lied to them, misled them, done all these things. So you're going to want to know why. Why is this happening? You have a faith and trust in government issue here. This is a Watergate level story. And so you've got to bring it Watergate level and be able to prove it to that. And I think that's why I have never come across, I've heard a lot of good stories from people who I respect, people who have good credentials, but besides just that good story, they don't have any evidence to back that up. And so that's why I've always stayed away from it, because it's such an explosive story if true. You've got to bring that nuclear bomb of a story to bring it to the public. And I think that's probably would be the biggest issue if they were going to tie in the crash retrieval stuff, is kind of, I think that's the problem some of the times with a lot of these UFO stories. This complaint that people have is they're not treated seriously. And to me, if true, it wasn't treated seriously. It wasn't presented seriously. I mean, this, if you can prove it, that's a big deal.
Exactly. And, I in anticipation, of course, like you said, there was a lot of hype that the bomb will be dropped by the New York Post and to prove all of these things, which hasn't happened. But I did expect that they would perhaps touch on the idea of crash retrieval. So I wrote my Roswell piece just a couple of weeks, or just yesterday or last week. And the reason I did that is just to kind of demonstrate, even in this case that is touted as the best case, there are a lot of questions and there's a lot of suspect and dubious, testimony related to that one. So that case, Roswell, is not a slam dunk. And then when we get to Eric Davis, and I like Davis. I think he's great. I think the stuff he's done is really interesting. But, if you were to look at the Davis from a unbiased standpoint, and I'm really shocked that, they did not, substantiate, or at least they didn't speak to Davis's credibility in this article at all, which really leaves them open to someone else doing it, because Eric Davis has claimed that he's seen creatures come out of portals, in Utah. He has claimed, for instance, that more lately, the latest things he's claimed is that he had this talk about crash retrievals with this admiral, and the admiral says that's not true. That's kind of a big deal. The other thing is, this MJ-12 document that he's allegedly saying is real is so incredibly dubious. There's dozens of problems with this document that show it's an overt fake, and so there are a lot of issues with relying on this one person. So, like you said, if this is true, and I think, having said all that, the article has a lot more in it than I expected. And I do think that where there's smoke, there's fire. If Elizondo and Reed are saying this, to your point, if this is true and credible information comes out to back this up, that is a huge deal that we have a crashed alien spacecraft. I mean, come on. If that comes out to be a real, and even us who are interested in this topic are skeptical, holy cow, that changes a lot. How is the public going to react? There are so many implications and national security implications to that. It's really scary. In fact, there's a gentleman, a PhD, I forget his name, in political science, who wrote about the dangers of sovereignty, the dangers that the potential of the revelation of intelligent civilizations out there could undermine even government and people's faith in government, like you were speaking to. Those are big deals.
Sure. And I think that's always, and it may just come from my background and kind of how I think about it, because I do take the more national security approach to everything. I come from a defense, homeland security type background. And so, the idea, probably I push back on a lot of conspiracy type stuff more than others. And it's not just because I want to keep things legitimate and pragmatic, but it's also because behind a lot of these conspiracies, if you get to the core of them, they relate to undermining and seeding kind of a divisive view towards government. And I mean, that is exactly what foreign adversaries try to do. I mean, we've seen that with the elections and stuff like that. So oddly enough, though, I push back on conspiracies, I'm also have this side conspiracy where I'm looking and wondering, well, who's saying this stuff and why? Why is this information? And I'll say to what you were just describing about Eric Davis and the point there with the Wilson memos and the 1961 Special National Intelligence Estimate. One thing that I can't get out of my head that continues to nag at me is that I think people have just dismissed and totally pushed to the side another set of documents that were leaked with those Wilson Davis memos. And those were the Kit Green emails between Dr. Kit Green, Dr. Hal Puthoff, and Dr. Eric Davis describing the alien autopsy video in which Kit Green was saying it was real to them. Now, I've spoken to Kit Green, and he's very candid about that and said someone, he didn't tell me who, but someone did indeed tell him it was real, did lead him to believe it. He doesn't know why they did that. He knows that they are lying. He knows that it was a hoax. He doesn't know why they tried to deceive him. Kit Green, I think, take out the UFO stuff about him. If you look at him in general, back to his career in the CIA, he was a very accomplished scientific, technical, medical officer with the CIA, big time, with weapons of mass destruction. He was the chief technology officer for Asian affairs for General Motors. So, I mean, he's held some high-level positions, and he, taken out all of his UFO stuff and the stuff he's done with, whether it be for injuries with UFOs and whatnot. He's a very accomplished medical professional in the fields of like ADHD research and everything. He's an accomplished professional, but someone was able to present a convincing enough hoax. So whoever this was, was able to convince him enough that this video, we know, he knows now, was fake, was real at one point in time. And so none of us, no matter what credentials we hold behind us, no matter how accomplished we are beyond being fooled. And I think that's where the peer review process comes into everything. That's science, whether it's any type of serious investigation. And so, that's where, like I said, if you're going to bring a topic like crash retrievals of alien, I mean, if true, we may be talking about the biggest development in human society since development of the language. This idea, we're not alone and we're being visited. You got to really put some work into and make sure that that's airtight and you can fully prove it, because the ramifications just across the board are something significant. I think that if I had to say it, and I don't critique the writers, because just like you said, there's so much goes into the process when you're writing an article. I don't know if, for all we know, the editors may be the one, hey, add some crash stuff. That'll be cool. It'll get more readers. We're assuming that they wanted to add it in, but we don't know that. Maybe they wanted to just do one on the UAP task force. But,
right.
That would be my only critique, is I just think it because of the subject, it should have been, it's got to be taken a lot more seriously than maybe it was.
Well, and you make a good point too. I agree with you 100%. I've also been talking about the other documents that had come out with the Wilson document, which is these notes allegedly from Eric Davis that outline his discussion with this Admiral Wilson, who denies that it happened. It should also be noted that Eric Davis has not commented on these notes, although many people who have said they've talked to Eric Davis about it in the past have come out and said, yeah, he told us about it. We believe it's real, type of thing. So who knows if it is real, but with this kind of suite of documents that came out, you're right. This Kit Green one, I think, is really important in that it demonstrates these guys are humans, that they are prone to being fooled just like anyone else. And these MJ-12 documents, for instance, that researchers, including myself, I think have demonstrated their hoaxes, have fooled a lot of people. So are these guys being fooled? That is a possibility. A lot of people think, oh, people in the know have all the answers, or they know whether or not, but without providing evidence, we're left to believe that were these guys fooled by this hoax, faked information? We don't know. I want to hear your comment. This is a great comment from Kurt. He said, it could be that Reed wanted his comments walked back and asked for the correction. I would disagree with this, and I'd love your point on this, because people have said this. A lot of people are assuming that the Reed and Elizondo paraphrases, essentially, are due to their conversations for this story. I don't believe that to be the truth. I don't think that's true. I think they're paraphrasing past comments. Why do I say that? If they interviewed them for this article, they would have used direct quotes, but they didn't use direct quotes. This is highly unusual too. Not only did they not use direct quotes, they didn't reference where these statements were made, and now they're having to correct them. So I think it's more indicative of incorrect paraphrasing of previous public comments that they've made.
No, I agree. Yeah, you would have expected, if this was an interview that had been conducted specific to this topic, and they spoke to Senator Reed and said, hey, so what are your thoughts on this? Yeah, I mean, I'll speak to myself. I would have used direct quotes. And then again, given what he was attributed to initially, I would have made darn sure. I'd have said, listen, I want to make sure this is, this accurately reflects what you said and what your real opinion is. And I think even, especially with something like this, where you're trying to get them to go on record as an anecdotal source. So they're going to give you testimonial evidence to something. You want to make sure that it's testimony they're going to stand behind. If they get called to the stand, they get called in public. Hey, did you? Yeah, I said it, and here's why. Because that was the other thing that's lacking with all of it is, why? That's important. I think we can say, well, Eric Davis had an accomplished career. I will not doubt that. And outside of just UFOs, I think if you look at his aerospace work, I mean, he's touched in a lot of fields going back to the late 1980s. And so I'm not going to doubt that at all. But why does he believe that we have crashed vehicles or, craft have crashed here? Why does he believe that? Why would Senator Reid believe that? That's important.
It is important. And on that point, I asked Eric Davis about a year ago on my podcast if he believed this and why. And I really kind of, I grilled him on it, and he really went off, and he shared why. And so it's another bit of a frustration, because I know at least Leslie Kane knows my work and is probably aware of that podcast. But I mean, it's laid out there, and essentially he's hearing from people. He said he was told by people. He was in a skiff, which is kind of weird because that's a secure environment. I don't know that he should be sharing anything that he hears in a skiff. But, he's talking to these people in their classified projects, which you're not supposed to share, information about projects to people who aren't read into the project. And he's saying, I heard from other people that this is going on. If that's all he's basing it off of, it's not that strong. And then he's also, we know, interested in that MJ12 document. So again, it's kind of something we knew, but we know what he's basing this off as well. And it's not that solid.
Yeah, well, I agree. I mean, an example of that is that in that Popular Mechanics article, if you go back to the article I wrote in February, Popular Mechanics, you'll notice that when I'm kind of covering the different things that I uncovered going through this, I briefly mentioned that I was made aware that some individuals from the former Bass crew had briefed Senate staffers in October 2019. This is the same staff briefing that was described in that article about crashed materials and everything. Now, when I heard that, I originally heard that from not Eric Davis, but somebody else that was there with him. That was from the Bass crew, and that was shared with me. It certainly was not presented as a focal point that this briefing or what they discussed for the Senate staffers had anything to do with crash retrievals beyond just this general idea, and frankly, no more than you've seen with the the Atom Project and stuff. Dr. Putoff and them. They're testing these materials because they believe that they could, have come from some type of exotic means off-world. Maybe they did. I mean, at least kudos to them testing it, and that way they'll be able to say, here's why we think this, here's the results. But from my understanding, when I was told about it going back to December and January, it was just kind of tangentially discussed. We may even have materials that have come from this, but the whole topic was UAP. And so that's why I just discussed it as just a broad topic. So you bring up a good point that it's hard to determine now, like that briefing sound differently, although I know it also mentioned a briefing to, I think how they termed it, a Defense Department agency or something. So it could be the DIA, it could be ONI, who knows? But I think what's also important there is that, Eric Davis told me when I interviewed him for the Popular Mechanics article, he was not a part of ATIP. So when I say ATIP, I mean the program that was run by Luis Elizondo, or the program that has since carried on, so the task force. So when the Bass OSAP contract ended, he parted ways, at least with the government's UFO interest. In fact, he told me that he didn't start coordinating or working with Luis Elizondo and Christopher Mellon until 2017. So they'd left the Department of Defense. So point being, any briefings that he gave, both to Senate staffers, and I assume, unless he is a part of the new program that we're unaware of, to a defense agency, that's separate from what's going on now. It's separate from what Lou Elizondo and ATIP did. It's separate from now.
That is such an important point. And essentially what that means is that his testimony is based off of things that he has heard and or discovered as a defense contractor, essentially, yes. Not necessarily associated with any official government UAP investigation work.
That's what he told me. So, I mean, unless that has changed or unless that wasn't inaccurate when he told me that. But yeah, that's what he told me. He didn't coordinate with Lou Elizondo, who was running that program after it closed from 2012. And I think there maybe has been a mention when he spoke to Stephen Greenstreet, excuse me, of the New York Post, that he maybe is a consultant something to the new program or not. I don't know. I mean, one thing I will say about the current ONI task force, all briefings that I am aware of that have gone before principal elected leadership. So that means the people speaking to Marco Rubio, speaking to Mark Warner, have been actual active officials with the U.S. government. So not even Elizondo told me that. So it's not like Elizondo's even gone before them. It has been before ONI. And I'll tell you what's going on in that task force or what goes on in those briefings. I have no clue, because it is absolutely treated like classified stuff would be, meaning nothing. And I have poked around as much as I can. I had a great, I've got a great quote from somebody I know who works in a separate intelligence agency, and they don't work on UFOs, but they said that. They said, I know that they're doing something over there, but on our end, we haven't even seen an assessment come out yet. And he said, so in my experience, that means whatever's going on is highly classified. So that was maybe why when I first mentioned I had a problem with the idea of the UAP task force being interjected with the crash material thing, because frankly, some people might know more. Certainly, there's some people like Luis Elizondo, because I do know that he still coordinates with them. Why wouldn't he? He was in the program. But I don't know that anybody has a true idea of what they're doing, because it's being treated like a legitimate classified program. For me, that legitimizes the topic. That legitimizes why we're looking at it. And it's not to speak bad about anybody else, but I think that this idea of all this other stuff and, this classified, we're in a skiff, we're in this, that's not how things are treated if it's really classified, if we're really talking about it. And if indeed the United States government or anybody has some kind of crash UFO, we would the fact that it has been held as closely secret and never been conclusively proven for 70 odd years or whenever it was recovered, would suggest to me we're talking about something beyond at an unprecedented level of secrecy, because we don't have example. People use the Manhattan Project. Well, look how they kept that secret. No, they didn't. Russia had the plans to that a year before we ever dropped the bombs in Japan. So, no, the Manhattan Project didn't keep secrecy. So we don't have the plans to the UFO, unless you believe Bob Lazar.
I want to talk more on that, because I think that's an extremely important topic, but I'm not beating up this article yet. And I apologize, and just to tell people, I'll kind of tell you why I'm beating up this article. And it's not because I am disgusted by it or something. I'm just to point out some of the problems to fully analyze it before I jump on it. And I will talk about, I think, what are some of the silver linings with the document. But here is another mistake that was made. Kurt just made the comment. He said he understands what we said about the correction with Reed, but he says it's shocking to him that they would make or he says he's surprised they would make such a mistake by experienced journalists. And I agree, but the mistakes don't stop there. There was a second correction that was made. And in this one, it says an earlier version also misstated the frequency with which the Director of National Intelligence is supposed to report on unidentified aerial phenomenon. It is 180 days after enactment of the Intelligence Authorization Act, not every 6 months, which is kind of a poor written correction, even because it's caused more confusion that from people I've had to kind of correct. So what they're saying is, for whatever reason, they wrote that the DNI was going to be asked to create a report every 6 months on UAP. That's not the case. What it says is after the bill is enacted, they have 180 days to submit their report. It doesn't say anything about continued reports. So I don't know why they included that, and they corrected themselves to correct that piece. The other gripe I had that I had talked about earlier was with the quote from Luis Elizondo. They said, Mr. Luis Elizondo is among a small group of former government officials and scientists with security clearances who, without presenting physical proof, say they are convinced that objects of undetermined origin have crashed on Earth with materials retrieved for study. That is not what Elizondo said. I think that they're referring, and they should have put what they're referring to, whether that was an interview or a previous statement. I think what they're referring to is when Lou was on Fox News with Tucker Carlson, and Tucker Carlson asked if he believed the government had materials from a UFO. And Lou said yes. He kind of hesitated to say it. Then Tucker Carlson kind of phrased his question and said, so you think there's debris? And Lou said, well, I don't want to really talk about this. I can't talk about things that are beyond my classification, interestingly enough. But he said, yes, I believe that. So that's materials. And that makes sense because the material that he's spoken about, To the Stars is talking about looking at, and throughout ufology that we've looked at, are small bits and pieces of material, some of which were found where a UFO was supposedly seen, and that's why it's associated to the UFO. And in some cases, they were submitted anonymously by people who allegedly were at a crash scene. So that's why there's a huge difference with him saying that it's a crashed object. That's bigger and much different than just material. So that's why people have been asking me, well, why are you making such a big deal about him saying a crash versus material? That's why. For instance, and I think Tim, you'd agree with this, even if we had, and some people have written on this, I know Dr. Chris Cogswell has written on this. But if we were able to confirm a piece is anomalous, that's not enough. Science is going to say, well, okay, we've got an anomalous piece of material. We can't prove where it comes from. We can't prove what it's related to. But if it's a craft, that's totally different. Then that throws that whole argument out. Then we know where it comes from and what it's related to.
Sure. Well, and I think I believe there's another error that I don't think anybody's picked up on except for, I'm pretty sure I noted it. And this is where people like John Greenwald, God bless him, this is who forced me to go back through my own articles with a fine-tooth comb, because I know that, these are kind of details that he picks up. But this is why that detail-oriented can be good, is I believe they said that Dr. Eric Davis started, I think they erroneously said when OSAP started. I think they said it started in 2007, but it was actually in fiscal 2009. So it was in 2008, I believe. And so it's such a silly little thing there. And that's probably why nobody's really harped on it. But again, that's why I said, I think that's what, there are some fantastic researchers here. Paul Dean's one, John Greenwald obviously is one. There's some great people out there that pay attention to those details, and when you become that detail oriented, I think it puts together a more comprehensive piece, just like you said, because there is a huge leap from we have strange materials. That could be part of a meteor that's come from a strange astronomical body. Doesn't mean it's a craft. And I'll tell you, since you brought up Lou and his comments on Tucker, because I've talked to, that's something I've brought up with him before. I've been like, man, you're really cagey when it comes to the whole UFO crash flying saucer thing. You kind of default to the NDA. What's going on there? And he's not told me anything different. However, I'll just put this out there because I think it's good for people to consider not to interpret or read too much into that. Because when you hear somebody like Luis Elizondo, somebody else who's held this classified, held a top secret clearance, and they say, I can't violate my clearance, I don't want to discuss that. Does that mean that he's, wink, wink, that means I can't discuss it because we have UFOs? Or does it mean that he's saying, I know that there's more to that whole story of crashed UFOs, and, it maybe isn't what people think it is. It's been used for other reasons, disinformation, whatever classified reasons. Those classified reasons can be very broad. We used it against the Russians during the Soviet Union. there's a lot of reasons that he could say, I can't talk about it, other than saying, I can't talk about it because, yeah, we have it and it's crashed. Maybe he can't.
Yeah.
But we have a bad habit of filling in that void of information with what either we want to hear, and both good or bad. So skeptics do the same thing. Uber skeptics. They say critics. There we go. Because I think there's nothing wrong with being skeptical. We all should be skeptical.
Right. So Adam Kehoe just joined. Thanks, Adam. And just in time, I was about to mention him. He's got a PhD in information science, and he's interested and follows defense policy issues. And he's been writing some articles on Medium that are extremely helpful. Very, very interesting. I highly recommend them. But he's also pointed out one other mistake about the Aerospace Corporation, which is being called a defense contractor who Eric Davis currently works for. But they're more than that. They are actually more of like a government think tank. I mean, since Adam's in here, maybe he can make some comments, or maybe you can comment to clarify that a little further. But it's kind of another mistake that was made in the framing of what Aerospace Corporation is.
Sure. Well, yeah. And I think it would depend on how Aerospace Corporation interpreted that when they saw the article, because they may have, like you said, they are a aerospace engineering think tank. They do a lot of different things. So they put people in different sectors. They have contracts with NASA, SpaceX. So they're not inherently a defense contractor. So they may have had some clients that were like, wait a minute, that not everybody's okay with the building bombs and warplanes. But and I think, and I see the Adam's comment as well, that was one of the, they changed that correction was not highlighted like Reed's correction or the dates of the reports. But initially the article identified Dr. Davis as briefing the Senate Intelligence Committee. So principal elected officials, and then they changed that to staff. And that is a big distinction, because staff can be briefed by a lot of different things for a lot of different reasons. You can get a meeting with staff members, and obviously that information can be carried to those principal elected officials, and they do help form policy. But it's a big difference getting an audience in front of especially the Armed Services Committee and the Senate Intelligence Committee. These are big time committees. I mean, just look at the national budget of the United States and how much is spent on defense. You realize these are power committees. And so these are typically powerful politicians and influential politicians. So there is a big difference between speaking to their staff and getting in front of them, which again, that's kind of why I've made the distinction that I don't think anybody would deny that no one except for officials with the United States government have briefed principal elected officials in closed door meetings. What has gone on in those meetings, who knows? But I think there's at least enough, and that's what I think probably Adam, I'm glad you brought up. He's great to have examining the topic, and he is writing fantastic articles, because I think Adam represents that segment of the population that the quote UFO community really needs to reach. Because here's a guy who's curious, rebelliously curious, willing to look at it, but he's looking at it from the tangible aspects and asking the questions that I think the average public and the stakeholders that would push this into the public arena from the government side would be asking. And so those are the people we need to answer, because the questions he asks are completely legitimate.
He framed the reason why we're questioning this article so much in a good way. And I want to get to that in just a second. But before we leave the article so much to talk about some of this other related stuff that I want to get to, is that the interesting part, the good part, and why I think it's so significant that Elizondo confirmed to me that he's cool with that statement in the New York Times, is really, I think that's the most significant thing, that Lou Elizondo, who ran the Pentagon project, who has had he's essentially batting 1,000 on accuracy as far as the things he's said he knows have been the truth. The difference with this article is he's not saying he knows, but he's convinced of this. He's essentially telling us that he is convinced. there are UFO crashes. I think some can assume that he's basing that off of what Davis has shared with the group. I don't believe that to be the case. I hope that's not the case. We don't know why. That's why one of the other problems with this article, it doesn't clarify that. But that's, I think, kind of a big deal.
It is, and I don't want to diminish that as well. So you're right. We've kind of we've spent some time, but pointing out some issues or concerns with the article. But I don't want to think that it's certainly not from my end that I'm totally bashing the idea of examining the potential that there has been something exotic that's crashed and have been recovered. My entire complaints and concerns have actually come from the idea that if true, that is a significant deal. Let's treat it that way. I will say that in the lead up to this article, I was surprised at the fact that I picked up interesting chatter, along the official channels, that people were more interested. People were more interested and knew about this article, and they were more interested in the idea that what exactly do they have, especially when there was some hinting that there may be some inclusions about official briefings that have been given to politicians about crash material. I was surprised because the chatter to me was kind of like there was a real counterintelligence concern. Like, did they have a leak? And like these briefings maybe did occur. I don't know, but so this is just interpretation of that kind of chatter. And that's when you're analyzing things, that's what you look at a lot, like the tone in people and the questions they ask. And then that's what we mean by chatter. Just so directly, nobody called and said, what do you know? But I thought it was interesting that it seemed to me that people were a little more interested in that than I would have expected. If it was absolutely nothing to it whatsoever, I would have expected people to be like, yeah, whatever. We don't care. We know it's going to be a dumpster fire, so it doesn't matter. But people can be interested. And so I don't think it's something, I mean, it's just like Roswell and the rest of these things. The reason they're still here is I have no problem saying on my end, I don't know that I've ever seen this conclusive proof that gives one definitive answer one way or another. As soon as you get this, people, they bring up the Project Mogul and they say, well, this is this and this. Then you get these other little threads that are just weird. And so I don't know if anything's ever been tied up with that. So I think the idea, there's definitely the idea of crashed UFOs is intertwined with this subject. The reasons for that, I don't know, but there's a reason.
Yeah. I mean, well, there's so many. I think, it's part of what I feel has been an evolution that has frustrated me certainly in the past is that, this field used to be all about, especially when the government was denying having interest, it was all about anecdotal information. And so anecdotal information became weighted more heavily than it should have. Now we're in a world since December 2017 in the first New York Times article by Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal and Helene Cooper that revealed this Pentagon program. Now we're not in that world anymore. We have more than just anecdotal information. We have some anecdotal information from experts, from firsthand witnesses, from credible witnesses, expert witnesses. And that's where the things have changed. And still, I think that it's still weighted too heavily in the UFO realm, anecdotal information. So that's the danger. But, I want to move on to the Senate Select Intelligence Committee. And Adam Kehoe wrote this morning, and I think this is a great summation of why we're so critical of this New York Times article and what it's saying in the nuances, which is that this what's going on with the Senate and UAPs is really important, and we're afraid that this article and some of the fallout could jeopardize that. And that is exactly how I feel. And we just heard this morning, and this is from Dean Johnson, who's been following this and has worked with this sort of thing, so he knows better than a lot of us, that the bill was packaged with another defense bill, and it's passed the Senate. So now it's moving on to the next steps there.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. This has always been my concern when I heard about this story, especially when it was supposed to contain Yeah, I think there has been, it distracts from what we have seen that is very much tangible. It's very much legitimate. It's very real. And there continues to be no walk back or anything to change that. Um, and indeed, I haven't had a chance to call the media relations at the Senate and everything just to confirm that. I did talk to Dean Johnson, and because some have pointed out that they didn't see, and in fact, I was one who looked that the actual Intelligence Act currently is not in the Defense Authorizations Act, but by all indications, it appears that it is going to be coupled, and this gets into the whole. If you ever remember Schoolhouse Rock, I'm a bill, on Capitol Hill or whatever. I didn't pay attention enough to those, so I'm definitely not a legislative expert, but it does appear that they're going to be coupled. And so the passing of the Defense Authorization Act is a positive sign that it's progressing. By all accounts, I don't think, especially with this being election year, we won't see a final passing of this. And so we won't see the final form of whatever this UAP provision is until probably December would be my best estimate. Maybe November, but I would say it's not going to be signed into law until it's not going to be fully passed and signed until December. But these are very tangible. And I think, for me, probably more significant than this recent New York Times article was the interview with Marco Rubio that was down there, CBS Miami. For me, that was significant because, again, I thought Rubio did a very good job explaining why, this provision was here. He didn't make it seem silly. He didn't, he was very articulate in explaining why this was important, why we should care. And I agree with everything that he said. And for me, that's significant because it puts it in a real world. And the idea that you have politicians who say that. Marco Rubio is a good example because recently, if anybody's seen it, some of his words back when he was running as a Republican candidate for president, some of his words against the current President Trump have come back to be used against him in political ads. See, Marco Rubio agrees. So politicians are very aware that what they say, what this news interview can be used against him. It's kind of like a police interrogation. It can be used against him in the court of law. And so the fact that he was still willing to do that interview, cover that topic, I thought was impressive because I know I believe Brian Bender reached out. I spoke to Senator Rubio's chief of staff and people, and at that, as of a couple of weeks ago, they weren't talking about it. But I thought he did a great job with it. I think that in and of itself is huge. I know that it's a step back behind where some of the UFO crowd wants, where I'm at the point where like, wow, they're willing to for me, that's confirmation, disclosure, the things people want.
Yeah.
They want to jump to the crash recovered stuff, but that is impressive.
I'm not as concerned with what the UFO community wants because, for the most part, unfortunately, I think that they have subscribed to a lot of the mythology that's been built out there, and there is this huge mythology that many are invested in, as opposed to looking at some of the real world type of things going on, which is unfortunate because I think that causes people to doubt and not appreciate some of the civil servants and some of the not just law enforcement or intelligence, but also our military personnel. Sean Cahill, one of the Nimitz witnesses, wrote a piece on this recently that, hey, you guys are bashing military guys who are coming out saying they're lying and keeping secrets. A lot of these people, the importance of what they've done in the past and speaking up for his fellow service people, which I thought was great. But here's how that with my interview with Chris Mellon, he really laid out kind of this plan that they had to get this to happen, to get this information out to the public and get the Senate to ask these questions. And part of that plan included unidentified. In fact, I wrote a piece in Den of Geek about how unidentified helped this all happen. And part of that plan was to get information out to the public to demonstrate. For instance, season 2 is covering a lot of great military cases. He said it's going to cover a NORAD case that got all the way to the 4-star general level. Why is that important? Well, as the Senate is asking for UAP reports from all of these intelligence agencies, what Unidentified is doing is demonstrating, hey, you know, they can't come back and just say we don't have nothing, because we know you have something. We have on the record these witnesses, these people telling us there are these cases, there are these incidents that happen that should show up in these reports. What's interesting about this New York Times article is that now it's also pushing that, it's joining that discussion to kind of further say, not only are there UFO cases, these reports should probably include what we believe to be crash retrieval cases.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. Well, and that's an interesting aspect. And I think that's interesting in both the concern, though. And I think you probably agree with me, because, you know, if certain agencies, obviously, I would say if anybody had any kind of crash material, it's not widespread. It's not like they shared it across all the different branches of government, or it almost assuredly would have leaked out by now. And so that means that there's certain branches that don't know anything about it, if it's true. And so,
well, yeah, and one of the Senate's concern was they didn't know about the UAP research at all. That's why they're asking these questions. Why didn't you tell us?
Sure. Yeah. Well, then that's, you know, it will be very interesting, because, the language is very clear that not only were they not told about certain things, but there's some concern about how much interagency and joint sharing is going on, which is a valid concern, especially, you know, everyone I think has noted it repeatedly, has said that the deafening silence of the Air Force is
right.
In my opinion, and talking to people, is that that's not because there's, you know, some secret cover up on their end. I think it's just a cultural thing as to they don't want to. They're a little gun shy from the Blue Book years, because I think it became problematic. I think for them, because if nothing else, I would say that's probably the biggest idea where a lot of these mythologies come into it, or these secret government cover-ups. Because much respect to Sean Cahill in the article he wrote, I agree with him 100%, because again, like I said, the underlying theme in this is this divisive thing that there's, you know, our service members or people are working against us. And you know, this theme that they, you know, the government's hiding all of that from you. And I don't think that's the case with the Air Force. I think what we're talking about is a very complex problem that it's easier to be like, forget this. You know, I'm washing my hands of this. You know, it's hard to solve. This is not what I'm equipped to do. I'm equipped to fight the enemy, you know, people I know, and militaries and everything. You know, I discussed this with Adam Kehoe not long ago. Again, that I think for fighting the battle on the government front, to make them take it seriously and maybe give more info or be more of a sharing partner, I think it probably is a better idea to do some civics classes or read some books on bureaucracy and kind of the inner workings of it first before the UFO books, because there's so many little aspects of this that can relate to why you would have a, quote, cover up without it being as overt and kind of sinister as it appears, you know?
Yeah. John Alexander, who used to be an inspector general in the Army, is someone who we're very lucky to have as a resource to be that knowledgeable on these issues, speaks to that. And I was speaking to Brian Bender last night, and he had a similar perspective as to what you're saying, in that there could be many reasons why they would want to not speak on certain issues beyond, you know, that they're real, or that just, you know, kind of getting what you're into. It's complicated. And also kind of what you're speaking to, the different approaches to the different services. He kind of feels that the Navy didn't necessarily go head first willingly into being as supportive as they have on this topic, but it's just a different PR stance where they have kind of gotten in front of the issue so they can at least seem to be, you know, cooperative and backing their guys and transparent, whereas the Air Force is doing the opposite and just keeping completely silent on, they're pulling an Eric Davis, they're completely silent on the issue. So just different kind of PR strategies.
Well, imagine for a second, because you got to realize the people who are in the position, sitting in the chairs to make those decisions. So imagine for a moment, Alejandro, you are a 4-star general in whatever branch. You have arrived here. You have been in this service for 30, 40 years. You're, looking at, you've just been put in this position, and maybe you're going to be here for 4 years tops before you're retired. And then unless you get called back in for, as a Secretary of Defense or something, some kind of executive appointment, you're done. And you've done your time. And then somebody comes to you and they say, man, this is the situation. Yeah, no, these things are real. Here's how we know they're real. We don't know what they are. Maybe we've got this and we got that. We can't figure that out and everything. They're not attacking us. What do you want to do, sir? The idea that you're going, I'm going to do the same thing the guy did right before, who was sitting here right before me. That is, forget this. This is just such a
that's a headache.
Topic. Yeah, and I'm at the pinnacle of my career. I don't want to be known as either the guy that screws this up or comes out and says, yes, they're real. We can't do anything about them. They've shut down our nuclear facilities. They're flying over it. We don't know what the hell they are. I don't want to be that guy. I'll let the next guy deal with it. And that's very real. That those decisions of a quote cover-up can be selfishly motivated, not necessarily organizationally. Right.
And it may seem counterintuitive for the layman, but for those of us who have interviewed the military on this topic for decades, that's the message we're getting, which is what John Alexander has been telling us pretty much the entire time. Now, Adam Kehoe made a comment here about one of the reasons, we're so worried about the Senate Intelligence Committee request getting messed up, essentially. He says, one thing to watch, there's long precedents to pass the defense authorization. If anything threatens its passage, it's likely to be cut to maintain that precedent. So if the intel portion becomes problematic, it could be dumped out of legislative pragmatism. In other words, the defense authorization, I think it's been 60 years in a row that it's been passed. And so they're not going to let that be jeopardized at all. However, D. Gene Johnson says that because it's passed, the Senate has passed it with this request, piggybacked on it, that the request, the weight of the question is already there, that essentially the question's been asked. We want to know more about UAPs. So he's saying that the weight of that request is still pretty strong, even if the bill doesn't pass.
No, I agree. I would say I'm pretty confident that it's going to pass. I would not foresee, first of all, there's no money tied to it right now. So it's not like they're asking for X million dollars to fund a program. They're just asking for a report. They're asking for, a comprehensive idea. To me, this is more of the groundwork and framework that leads to financial budgets, that leads to funding. So you get a report that says, this is what we know. We don't have this cooperation. We do have this. And so they go, oh, well, then what do you need to do better? We need X million dollars. We want to form this. So that, to me, this is a kind of framework for that step. Since there's no money involved in it, I wouldn't see much pushback on it. It's not a partisan issue. So it's not one that I think is a bargaining chip that you're going to use out here. You're not going to see it get squabbled up between a Republican-Democrat fight, because I think both sides do realize the topic in and of itself is widely popular with the general public. I mean, that's the thing, is that we see, whenever when the FBI drops their Roswell files, or the CIA does their UFO files, or when they release the 3 videos with Naval Air Command on their FOIA reading room, they crash the reading room because so many people go to see it. So the topic itself is interesting enough. It has enough constituency report. I wouldn't see anybody fighting it to make it a bargaining chip to be taken out. But Adam's right. It could be, if you had somebody for whatever reason to want to fight it. It's on the opposite end of that spectrum. Is it something that they're going to fight to keep in? And I wouldn't say no. I think there's other issues they would want more than that. So it's interesting. I think that this first little piece will be interesting. Maybe I'm more pessimistic than most. I don't anticipate a groundbreaking unclassified report if it passes and it's released. I don't anticipate that. Not that it won't be interesting, although at the same time, a report that said, we have had X number of encounters or X period of years that are UAP. That would be groundbreaking. I think, let me walk it back where I say groundbreaking being, here's the unclassified report. Here's why we say they're UAP. Here's the data. Here's the everything.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to see that. I don't. That's
makes me chuckle because I think of a Doctor Who scenario where they release all these reports of situations where, they had to fight off aliens. Well, they came and they attacked, but we were able to fight them off and they're gone now. But then they did come back and then this other group came back. But more realistic. There are some interesting cases out there, such as Gordon Cooper, the astronaut, saying at Edwards Air Force Base when he was working on, testing projects, and some object came and landed in the dry lake bed they were doing tests in, and they filmed it. I mean, what if that film came out? That would be astonishing. Better film when it comes to Nimitz, according to Elizondo, there's a lot more films out there. So there could be something pretty interesting, but we'll see, I guess, huh?
Well, yeah, I'll give you this little tease. I haven't had a chance. Not that it's even newsworthy, so I wouldn't put it out on anything but Twitter. But you'll get an exclusive here. Is that I just got a FOIA response back from I think it was ONI. I think it was Naval Air Weapons Systems Command. But I asked for any releasable responsive videos. I get it. If they're classified, you can't. But I asked for it that were housed on unclassified or classified servers, because you can house unclassified information on classified servers. So I asked for check both, and that depicted what the Department of Defense has officially in public statements described as UAP. So any and all, whether it be still photographs or motion picture visuals. And the response they came back to me is that my request was too broad. There was too much. And I'm like,
what?
I'm like, and that's what, unfortunately, this is one of the ones they didn't give me a FOIA officer directly. This is where it's the automated. Sometimes they give you one. So I'm appealing it, but I'm thinking, I don't know how. I have to get with John. He's the FOIA guy. Say, how do you narrow down? I mean, I was very specific, gave examples of where they officially called UAP. I'm thinking, well, wherever you got those first 3 videos, look there.
Maybe they're like, well,
it's too big of a file.
Which model are you asking for, or which civilization do you want? Do you want craft from Zeta Reticuli? Do you want them from Pleiadians? You got to give it more specific info here.
That's what, that's
weird.
Yeah. Well, and the only thing that's better is if, they gave me a response that said, yeah, sure, we've got X number, we've processed the cost for processing this all be $1 million because we've got so many videos or whatever. So suddenly you're crowdfunding. You're begging everybody for some money. But I'll appeal it. But I just thought it was interesting because they said they didn't say there was no responsive. They said it was too broad.
I want to move on to another topic, which is the idea, kind of clarification around special access programs, unacknowledged special access programs. You and I got in an interesting Twitter conversation with Tyler Rogaway. I think Adam was in there. Maybe even Brian Bender. I can't remember all who was in there, but people knowledgeable about this stuff. But most importantly, Chris Mellon. And essentially, Chris was saying that, the Congress has oversight of all programs. USAPs, as they're called, unacknowledged SAP special access programs. These are the black projects, but they have oversight on all. Some of them may be limited. I think he even said it's possible they could be limited to just the president and other need to know, but that they all come under, that umbrella. But interesting enough, the conspiracy guy in the room was Tyler Rogaway, from a defense writer for the Warzone. Great writer. I love his stuff. And he was suggesting perhaps there is a way to house a project outside of that kind of oversight. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And yeah, no, I love Tyler. And in fact, I've written for the Warzone and working on something now about crash retrievals. No, I'm just kidding. I am working on something now for the Warzone. So yeah, still write for the Warzone occasionally. Love Tyler. But yeah, we definitely disagree on this point. And I think, all right, just to break it down a little bit, you're right. The term special access program, you have varying types. You have the just general special access program, SAP. These are acknowledged. And so when they said it's acknowledged, if you look at the defense budget right now, you'll see them, not what they are, but you'll see the code name. So the unclassified code name. Some of them are like Retrack Larch, Retrack Elm, Chalk Eagle, Huggy Bear. These are acknowledged. Okay. So we don't know what they are, but we know generally what they're working on because they fall under a certain specific line item. So aerospace, R&D, whatever. Then you have unacknowledged SAPs. So this is your USAPs. That just means that gets lumped up in another budget item that says classified programs, X million, trillion, whatever. So they don't describe what that is. So that's where that unacknowledged SAP comes from. Then you have, and I believe I didn't see Christopher Mellon's comments, but what is called a waived unacknowledged special access program. And this all relates to who's in charge, who's the oversight. You have a SAP oversight committee, a SAPCO that governs all of these things. And I'm not going to get into the weeds with all of this bureaucracy, but a waived USAP narrows the scope of who knows about it and how much oversight is involved in it. And like you indicated, Christopher Mellon might have said that you can narrow the scope to a waived USAP to just about as tight as the president, the Secretary of Defense, and the Assistant Secretary of Defense. And most importantly, what's called the Gang of Eight. And so this is the minority and majority leaders of the Senate Intelligence and Armed Services Committee and the speakers of the House. You can narrow it to these 8 congressional leadership. But as Christopher Mellon said, that's who forms the oversight. There's still elected leadership that is briefed and aware of these waived USAPs. It just is narrowing down that compartmentalization. For Tyler's point, and anybody that saw our discussion, is he's theorizing is that potentially, if you're talking about a extraordinary breakthrough technology that its known existence could, end life as we know it. It would be a total polar shift in the shift of power, this type of thing. So it's not just that we have it, but if China or Russia got it, that this would just change the world as we know it, that there could be some exception in which things would be withheld and controlled in a completely separate process that we're totally unaware of. And me and Tyler talked after just the Twitter comments, because people probably think me and him are getting into it. We have some great lively debates, but we chat afterwards. We're good buddies. I think that his idea there is that potentially, and he was very, when we spoke off the air, should you say, behind the scenes, he's always saying, man, I'm just throwing out theoretical ideas, trying to think of everything. And the idea of this super secret compartmentalized, basically a breakaway government group, is that any crazier than it being aliens? And I'm like, well, no, I'm not saying it's either one. There's no evidence for either one. But yeah, what for anybody that saw that argument, or I should say debate, Tyler thinks, and he's not alone in that, is that really what we're talking about would be a breakaway government fraction or something. So it would not be anything within normal chain. And frankly, for me, it gets into a realm of conspiracy, a little further into the realm of conspiracy than I'm typically comfortable with, or I think that I just think it would be hard to hide that. Anything's on the table until it's not. But I think the idea that you could have a fraction of government that could hide something like this from another fraction of government and be responsible, even if they were responsible for the good 5% of all UFO sightings. That's a pretty big number.
Mm-hmm.
So I also don't know why you would have a breakaway government fraction as this, and then decide, hey, you know what? Let's go fly it over some civilian centers, or let's go fly it over into the Nimitz training group and mess with them a while. I don't know what purpose that serves. That would be good.
Yeah. And you know, in his defense a bit, I'm trying to look up the chain. Here it is. Because I think what inspired this was, here's what Christopher Mellon that said inspired this conversation. He said, somebody asked him, Chris, do you think there may be any connection between the Navy patents filed by Salvatore Cesar Pais and the technology that Lazar witnessed? Likewise, could that same tech be the same of what our pilots are seeing? I appreciate what you do. Salvatore Cesar Pais submitted some patents of some technologies that are essentially anti-gravity. They created kind of a wave of conversation. Some scientists saying that they're theoretical and not really plausible, but something that doesn't seem to have been built. And Pais worked for the Navy when he created these. So some people have speculated, hey, they look very similar to what the Tic Tac was. So did we build that? Is that what he's talking about? Well, Chris says, I looked into this and found disputes regarding whether the physics involved in Pais's patents is even viable. There's no indication or testing or prototypes. What our pilots are seeing is not secret U.S. stuff. First thing Navy and DOD did was check to make sure they weren't ours. So somebody then asked on a different tweet, was that are we to assume the SAP review was comprehensive? Meaning did they look at everything? Mellon says, yes, the point is to ensure there is no duplication of SAPs and that all SAP programs are lawful, accountable to the SecDef and Congress. So the first thing the Navy did was check with this group to see if these might be U.S. Air Force or DARPA, etc. They clearly were not. So he's certainly convinced that they have oversight or can see into all of the black budget programs to verify that these are not black budget. And, he was called, maybe it was in unidentified, kind of the king of intelligence when he was working for one of his past positions where he had oversight of all of these. So he would be someone to know. So Tyler Rogaway is suggesting, and nobody answered this question, and it was kind of a hot question because I was asking, so essentially you're saying this would be a sort of program that's designed to be hidden from the Chris Mellons of the world. And or denied if ever come up. And to his defense, it's kind of, if you've got aliens versus super secret program, both of them are a hard pill to swallow. I think I had mentioned with you, but aliens is a little bit less likely, maybe a lot less likely than the possibilities that Tyler Rogaway are putting forth. It seems ridiculous and crazy to think that somebody out there has technology like this that's so advanced and has had it for a long period of time. But at the same time, it's kind of crazy to think aliens are visiting here, kind of flying around, crashing when they're cruising around, checking us out, and we, can't get pictures and videos of them, or rarely. So either of them is kind of not plausible, but something's going on.
I agree. No. I mean, that's why I think it frustrates people. I know me and Mick West, when I did his show, we had a jovially saying, when he says, give me your list of your top 3 explanations. I'm like, I don't have one. So like, I'm very firm in saying I don't know, because I can give you 10 reasons that aliens is not crazy, or 10 reasons aliens is crazy. I can give you 10 reasons why the secret breakaway SAP is crazy, and 10 it's not. And so there's not enough evidence to say any of the plausible explanations I have ever heard fit. And that's one of the things with the black secret technology. I think that's understandable for people to go down that route first. I mean, we should. We know that exists. You're right. That's less crazy than aliens. And for me, one of the hardest things with that idea that it's a secret black budget technology is, if we are to take for face value, if we're to believe what witnesses have said, and let's just narrow it down to the tic tac. So let's narrow it down to 2004. We have nothing that, there's no evidence that we should dispute what Commander Fravor and three other pilots saw with their own eyeballs. So we're not talking about the atmosphere. What they saw, the tic tac, this pill shaped something. This isn't a classified project. This isn't like a stealth bomber. This is something that is achieving and maintaining flight and lift beyond how we know is possible. There's no wings, which means it's got no control surface. It's got no angle of attack. So if you looked at aerospace and engineering from the Wright brothers to right now, or the F-35s or the new B-21 Raider, so the tops, it's all the same principle of lift, propulsion, drag, wings, angle of attack to maintain flight. So when we're talking about something else, I mean, like, there's just no hints at anything around of where we would be able to achieve that. Certainly not to the degree of the maneuverability people say. And so that's where I'm always like, again, everything's on the table till it's not. But I'm thinking, man, that means somebody has achieved some really remarkable stuff that we don't even have hints to. And that the Salvatore Pais piece, I think that really the authority on that would be Brett Tingley, who really covered that in depth for the. But I've told him, my concern with that thing, besides what Chris Mellon said he looked into, from point one, my concern is that the media outlet that first brought those patents to everybody's attention, well, at least brought it to the other writers, like Brett or others. The first people who covered it first was Sputnik, the Russian foreign media outlet. So this is the Russian media outlet intended for foreign audiences. They're a registered foreign agent in the United States. So, I mean, it's a state-run media. I just have a hard time believing that Russia, if they believed that it was something the U.S. really had, would be like, hey, let's throw it out on the Sputnik news and see. Or B, if we really had it, you wouldn't want Russia to have it. So the fact that Russia reported it first made me think that maybe there's more going on to there, or maybe it's some good old-fashioned old spy games between countries. I don't know, but I mean, that's the thing, is that I'm with you. Aliens.
Yeah, Adam asked a question pertaining to this. He says, has Mellon possibly precipitated an impossible policy dilemma? What do we do if we stop ignoring this? And that's a great question. And I wonder, so for instance, if this starts being a thing where we've got news stories about the latest findings of the UAP task force or the latest cases, how are people going to react? There's this anime I love, and I feel like this might be accurate. And essentially, there's this breaking news, and this kid is all excited about it, that aliens are here, and everybody's like, they don't care. They're like, big deal. That could be possible. And maybe I often think that if we didn't stop at Blue Book, if the Air Force didn't kind of push it all under the rug and was more transparent and just saying, yeah, there's these things flying around, we don't know what they are. If that would be kind of like bugs or bees, something that we wouldn't really think much of. It's just a fact of nature that there's something out here we can't explain and we're looking into it. But another question I thought of, which is kind of scary, is what about the situation we come out and we say, we don't know what these things are. And then Russia says they're ours and we have tech that is way better than yours. And even if our government says that's not true, they're lying. You know how it is. Today's world, they may be believed, and that could create some really scary situations.
When you really examine this topic and examine it from a very sophisticated kind of tangible aspect. So you're looking at how the government works and all these different things. It becomes extremely nuanced and complex, because what Adam mentioned is true. He wrote a great article, like, what's the end game here? And so he's right. So we're no longer ignoring it. The government comes out and says, hey, man, this is real. Here's why we know it's real. Here's some videos. Here's some pictures. And you're right. I think everybody mitigates the anxiety that may be involved with this idea that something else is coming here, or something else exists in our world and we're not the kings of it, by always saying, well, somebody knows what it is. Somebody's got the crashed UFOs. Somebody's made the secret treaty at the air base with the president. But if they come out and say, no, seriously, guys, we don't have a clue. But yes, we agree with you. It's real. How does that upset things in terms of just sociologically, culturally? I think Adam brought up a very valid point. How does that change? This goes into the decision makers' minds. So I'm asking for $1.3 trillion worth of F-35s. And now I'm a congressman sitting on here going, why am I going to give you $1 trillion? The F-35s aren't nothing compared to those Tic Tac things.
Right.
What do we do to get to that? And you're having to explain, well, we don't know, but we need the 35s because of China and Russia and the things that And so you create this just crazy, conflicted world. But at the same time, do you just take the stance, hey, they're not zapping us, they're not messing with us, so just ignore it? To me, I think that idea has proceeded and been taken on a lot of times. It's just that same scenario that the guy wearing 4 stars says, you know what, I'll let the guy behind me deal with that crap, because I don't, this is not something that I'm trying to equip with. And most importantly, one idea that I think has involved the overwhelming bulk of secrecy related to this topic is that one thing that you do not discuss, it is as classified as your own top secret technology, that is your vulnerabilities. And so these things demonstrate vulnerabilities. If they can pop in and out of our airspace, if they can shut down our nuclear missiles, if they can fly over our nuclear sites with impunity, that is a vulnerability we cannot defend. We can't stop it. And the idea of vulnerabilities to your defense is something that is classified, but they don't talk about it. It's as much classified as your own classified technologies that people think of.
Now, we're kind of running out of time, so I'm going to stack these 2 questions. Steve McDonald's question, I think, was more rhetorical anyway, but they're both science related. He says, there is an aspect from the Tic Tac that isn't often talked about. If it is man-made, where is the body of research that supports that technology? Which is a great question, because we don't have that. Some people refer to the Pais documents, but those are highly theoretical, certainly not near application in any way. So that's a great question. Then Adam says he's got a weird question. It's not that weird. I actually asked a scientist this last night, something similar. He said, is the task force talk to any other scientists, such as SETI or METI scientists, search for extraterrestrial intelligence, or METI is messaging extraterrestrial intelligence, programs that scientists have put together. Or have they just talked to any civilian scientists outside of the put-off school, meaning, the people inside of BASS? And I think those are important questions, because last night with the Scientific Coalition of UAP Research, we had a great presentation from physicist Kevin Knuth, and he was able to put together these ideas to calculate what might these civilizations be like. And I highly recommend people watch it. You can go to explorescu.org or go to the SCU YouTube to watch this. But he is really taking science to scientifically figure out some of the characteristics of some of these civilizations, which I think is the next step. I think it's extremely important. And I said, has anybody reached out to you from the government? This is the type of thing that we need to start doing. And he says no, nor is he aware anybody in academia that is doing that sort of thing. So maybe because it could be part of the secrecy, part of the problem. And they talk about these in Black projects. You can't share much information with other people who aren't read into the program. And that's some of the what makes SAP programs so expensive and difficult. So that's, I don't think, being done, but is probably maybe the next step, right?
Sure. Yeah. Well, no, you would think so. And I just want to make sure that I formally now give Steve McDaniel an apology for not giving him his due credit. And I blame that on MJ, Steve, because we co-wrote that article about the UAP task force. He knows what I'm talking about. But no, here's the thing is, and I've said this to plenty of people, in terms of who the current task force is working with, reaching out with, or what are they doing, I truly don't know. And I will say that I have tried. It is everything I have heard about what's going on is completely consistent with how classified programs are run, which means they don't get out, and it makes it very difficult. And so I don't know that if they've reached out to anybody, there's no reason for me to believe that they have. And moreover, and I've said this, I think last time we spoke, is people need to remember it's being run by the Office of Naval Intelligence right now. Before that, even with Lou, it was run for the Undersecretary of Intelligence. It's being run as an intelligence program. We can argue whether that's good or bad later, but how the intelligence community handles certain things is it's very highly secretive, and it's handled as an intelligence endeavor and not a scientific technical research endeavor. And so, if things, if that shifted, if it moved under DARPA or it moved under one of the Office of Scientific Investigations or Scientific Intelligence, instead of one of the military intelligence, you would probably see a shift. And so you would have more of an inclusion. You'd have grants and various contracts maybe being issued out, much like how Bass got involved in ILSAP, but going to different academic institutions. So right now it's being treated as an intelligence problem and not a scientific problem. But I think we'd have to include everything. I definitely would be interested. I'm looking forward. I was unaware of that SEU video with Dr. Knuth, but I'll check that out because I will say this much in terms of seeing the government come out and work more with scientists. I would say the potential is very much there because of organizations like SEU, because of Sky-Hub that's just got founded up. I got my briefing on Sky-Hub from Dr. Chris Cogswell recently, and thanks, Steve. You didn't give me the briefing, but Chris did. I was very, very impressed. I was really, really impressed by what I heard and was like, how can I help you? And so I connected them with some people who, are using different camera systems for astronomical, meteorological events, but have the same type of things. And I'm like, man, who can I connect you with? How can I help you? Because these are legitimate endeavors. And so I think with things like the SEU or Sky-Hub, and we're seeing this, when you have legitimate organizations that emerge that are doing legitimate work, you will see it. But I think you probably agree with me that a lot of what we've seen, at least if you think of the more recent history, they haven't been as legitimate effort.
Yeah, at least the civilian ones, definitely. And there's definitely a lack of resources. And people are afraid to put their credibility or their reputation on the line. But, it makes me think what you were just saying. And to kind of wrap things up, I will give another shout out to Paul Dean, the Australian researcher. His Twitter and website are UFOs documenting the evidence. And he wrote a tweet, why aren't people asking NORAD Air Force Space Command and NORAD Center for Aerospace Analysis questions? Because he's been able to track in the last few decades, while the government allegedly was not looking into this, he was able to track UFO cases back to these organizations and being researched by these organizations and some of the scientific departments inside there. So even if we just get a history of the task force, a history of what work has been done, if that's all they give us, that would be extremely interesting because we know so little. Since, as I wrote my article, we've been gaslighted on this issue for the last few decades by the government and by the military. So it is, I got to wrap this up, but thank you so much for being here again.
Thanks for having me on, Alejandro. Yeah, no, absolutely. It's always fun. And next time we chat, I'll tell you about my next mission to take on NORAD, because I think that's where the next political agenda is, because,
Oh, there's an upcoming, I guess, episode of Unidentified that will cover a great NORAD case. And you're going to be in the episode tomorrow or soon here?
I don't know. I mean, I know I was interviewed. I am in Unidentified, but I don't know what episode is.
I heard it's tomorrow's.
I heard it might be, yeah, it may be the third. Yeah, so tomorrow, but I don't know whether they've split it out and whether there's going to be some more. I don't know, but it was a fun time and very impressed with the people running that show. I'll say Anthony Lapp, got a chance to meet him. Great guy.
Yeah.
Very impressed with how they did it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And also thank you because you're joining from Germany. So I know how that can be difficult with the major difference in time zones.
No, man, it's always great, man. It's always great to chat.
Thanks. All right. Thanks, everybody. And thank you all for joining. Some of you might have noticed I've got these little aliens in the background because I'm not in California at Open Minds headquarters. I'm at the UFO Congress headquarters. So that's what those are. They're T-shirts and things like that. So you could check the UFO Congress out if you're interested in that stuff. But thank you all so much for joining. In 30 minutes, I'll be back on the air speaking about the news of the week. Similar type of things with my buddy Martin Willis as we record Open Mind UFO Radio. So hope you can join me for that. Thank you all for coming. And thank you so much, Tim. We'll talk to you later.
Absolutely.